The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 10-11 Free Lunch. Pell, how do I search for the resin? Lex asked as he surveyed the land. The feedback he was getting from the glyph was immense, and turning it into usable information was quickly becoming a massive burden on Lex. It was still fine when he hadn't noticed, but now that he had, it was as if every individual grain of dirt, every rock, every insect and animal in the vicinity were all giving him individual feedback. If he didn't find a way to filter all this information, he would soon be overwhelmed. You influence the glyph through the use of domination, Pell informed him, while he transferred the relevant data over to Lex. Once you can control the technique, you have to raise the bar just high enough that you no longer get any feedback from your surroundings, and then increase your sensitivity at the same time. The ingenious thing about this glyph is that it is designed to peek through seals that are designed to hide treasures. After all, while the aura of the treasure can be suppressed, the way it interacts with laws cannot. Seals actually just compensate for any interaction the treasure would have, thereby preventing any traces from appearing out in the open. But the WYRM's glyph is not looking for traces at all. It is instead measuring quantity and capacity for interactions with laws. Master, considering the weakened state of your domination, your range will not be too large, so you will have to search on your own. But once you're in the vicinity of the resin, you should be able to sense it hypothetically. Lex decided not to focus on Pell's last word, and began regulating his technique until he was just above the level where he got any feedback from his surroundings. As much as he wished for an easy solution, he still had to search. His preliminary search would be from the surface. He was hoping that the range of his glyph was great enough to locate the resin from the ground, for if he was forced to dig then that would add another great obstacle in his path. Just to be sure he was doing his utmost, he spread his spirit sense to its limits as well, before he began flying just over the ground at breakneck speeds. He could have run, yes, and it would not be much slower. But why put in so much effort when he could just fly? It was a humbling observation. As he grew stronger and stronger, and his place in the universe grew, it was important to reflect upon what his power meant for the world around him. He remembered back on Earth, one time in college he failed a class because of which he lost his scholarship. He had felt so miserable then. He wished some all-powerful being would come and just reverse time to give him another chance so that he could do it differently. He had sworn so deeply that he'd do it differently if he had just one more chance. It turned out later that he didn't need a deity to help him out. He talked to his professor, who gave him an opportunity to redeem his grade by redoing a critical assignment. But the temptation of an all-powerful being just solving his problem for him had gripped him so strongly when he felt so miserable, even though back then he did not believe such things existed. Now he himself was an all-powerful being. More importantly, he wondered if his problems looked the same to the countless beings more powerful than him. What must the mysterious man who just showed up inside his room at the inn one day think of him when he looked at Lex? Perhaps, to him, guiding Lex was no more effort than Lex throwing out a piece of meat for the ants. Lex paused for the briefest of moments. He looked through his spatial bangle and found a lot of food that was no longer as nutritious to him now that his realm had grown. As he continued to fly over the land, he threw bits and pieces of it here and there to some animals he saw struggling. Although Lex was not too into charity himself, it also didn't hurt to help others now and again, especially if it was no big deal to himself. After all, he had also benefited from the help of others. It seemed that sometimes, in life, there were free lunches. Chapter 10-12 Pop goes the. Lex decided not to measure time and instead just focus on his search. Such a mentality, alongside the fact that it was perpetually sunny in the Midnight Realm, made it so he really could not tell how long it had taken him. Eventually there came a time that he scanned the entirety of the region, but was unable to discover the resin or anything else that might hint at it. That meant he would need to conduct the search underground. How wonderful. He did not need to think back to the time in the Crystal Realm when he got buried underground, or the Dragon's Basement, or basically any time he went below the surface, to know that this would not be a pleasant experience. New N0 Veil chapters are published at novelhall.com. If for no other reason than because he had no way to easily travel through solid ground, this was going to be a tedious journey. But then he paused. No, wait, it seemed he really had a way to travel through solid objects. If he changed his body from its physical form to his soul state, couldn't he travel through the ground? He could avoid entering the soul plane, which was something he would have to experiment with at a later time because he could not even begin to imagine how he'd search for the resin through another plane of existence he had no experience with. What's more, he could also turn himself into thought, and travel through the mind of the countless living creatures here, and search through their memories to see if they had any recollection of something that might hint towards the resin's location. For a moment Lex became disoriented as his perception of the world changed as he realized the scale and scope of his abilities. He was too used to seeing the world as he knew it from back when he was immortal. Perhaps this was a drawback of progressing too quickly in his cultivation. He hadn't had time to reflect on the changes it brought him. He also vaguely understood what Cassandra meant when she said that he needed to change his worldview before growing stronger, or he'd always have limited strength. Of course, she had been more specific and mentioned the tenets of immortality and how they would be weaker if he didn't adapt. Even though most of the space underground was occupied by larger boulders buried deep, or crush created from crumbling larger rocks, the ground-dwelling creatures made use of the limited soil in between. In fact, the soil became a sort of highway for these creatures to travel, and their homes seemed to be small caves that they drilled in the rocks themselves. When Lex touched such a creature he finally felt some kind of sensation, but before he could focus on it, the creature's soul popped, startling Lex. He didn't mean to kill it, but soul had been too fragile to even sustain his touch. After offering a silent prayer for the dead whatever it was, Lex decided to continue with his reduced speed for now. He confirmed that touching another soul would result in some kind of hindrance, and though he would most likely be fine, the experience of popping another soul was quite unpleasant. He felt so guilty. What was worse was the ectoplasmic soul go that was stuck to his finger from popping the soul. He had no idea how to get it off, and he didn't want to rub it on his pants. Wait. He looked down and discovered that he was still wearing his suit made by Jeeves. Did he just turn his suit into a soul, or was this an ability Jeeves gave the clothes when he made them? Or was the suit a part of him now? Was Lex a suit? With the increasing number of mental crises he was experiencing, Lex continued to search for the resin. Chapter 1013 Sealed Domain. Traveling underground was an experience unto itself. Once he got over the fear that his soul would crash into something, and actually sped up, he discovered that there was a lot more to the underground than just endless dirt and rocks. There were so many plants, not even counting the extensive root network for whatever plants could bury roots so deep. There were living creatures with underground colonies that gave Lex wonderful ideas for his own inn. There were more than just a few underground rivers with water to clean and cold. Lex actually felt tempted to stop and take a drink. Eventually Lex spread his soul sense out as well, and was amazed at the fact that life was thriving just as much this deep underground as on the surface. Lex also found something he completely would never have expected. A massive network of chambers had been excavated to create somewhat of an abode, and it was covered in remnants of protective formations. Out of curiosity, Lex stopped by and discovered the remains of a cultivator who seemed to have died alone at some point. All his belongings were still present, including a personal diary that Lex perused for a brief moment. As it turned out, the fellow became a hermit after getting dumped by his fiancée, who then married his own father. He was too ashamed to show his face in society ever again, and so spent the rest of his life underground. Lex put the diary back, only reflecting on the fact that the fellow was not ridiculously large, and was only 8 feet, 2.4 meters, tall. Read latest chapters at novelhall.com only. Since there was nothing related to the resin here, he decided to leave the abode as is. But, on yet another whim, before he left he carved his initials into the wall, leaving a mark to show that he had been here. He also took out a small lockbox and put a copy of Evisceration, and a vial of spirit liquid in it, leaving it there for anyone to discover. Lex frowned, and then recalled all the information he had received about the region surrounding the resin. Although he was aware that the resin was sealed, he did not get any information about anything that could be a significant energy source. That meant that either the information he received was not actually complete, and was just a brief overview of the realm, or that someone else had created this. He felt more inclined to believe the first one. After all, the realm was massive, so for Lex to believe he could get all the information about all of it in such a short time was pushing it. So how do I access the domain? He asked as he continued to come closer to it. There are two ways. The first is to be so superior to the domain that you can unravel it yourself. That is not so easy to achieve. The second option is to go to the entrance of the domain and enter normally. As long as you obey the rules of the domain, it is entirely possible to get through not only unharmed, but be rewarded with the treasures the domain hides as well. What are the rules? How do I find the entrance? The rules for each domain are separate, Master. But you can probably find the entrance as long as you follow its wall. There should be more than one entrance anyway. How long do you think it will take to resolve this domain? Lex asked. He still had things he needed to do as the Innkeeper. He couldn't just disappear for days or weeks. That's hard to say. But I think it's safe to say that it won't be quick. Chapter 10:14 Looking to the Future. Of course, nothing was ever easy or straightforward. But considering the rarity and use of the treasure he was searching for, perhaps it was called for. He felt a tinge of disappointment, but then again, he knew that there would be some kind of seal around the resin. It only made sense that it was not so simple to overcome. He decided to mark the location and come back once he officially finished all his innkeeper chores, but before leaving, he wanted to find the entrance. He continued to trace the domain wall, though at a distance. The last thing he wanted was to activate some kind of restriction and then be pulled into the domain against his will, once again leaving him to control the inn remotely. It seemed that experience really did build the man, for without his experiences, Lex wouldn't even know what possible traps to avoid. As he trailed it, Lex was able to confirm that the domain was absolutely massive. In fact, Lex would not be surprised if the domain turned out to be bigger than some countries back on Earth. You said there were supposed to be multiple entrances? Lex eventually asked Pell after nearly 10 hours of trailing. By now, he was fairly certain that the domain was larger than the rocky terrain above him. That was not a good sign. Usually that's the case. This is because the entrances to each domain also serve as an exchange vent for the spiritual energy within and outside the domain, which is needed to maintain the delicate internal environment. If there aren't many, then perhaps the internal environment is stable enough that it doesn't need many. Excellent. That's great news, Lex said, realizing that his job was getting harder and harder. Normally Lex wasn't one to get flustered so easily, but the deadline, however long it was, alongside the incredibly difficult task of raising the system's level was weighing on him. He checked and discovered that he only had 4 days left before his host attire stopped working. Since Luther had not returned yet from the minor realm, Lex summoned all the other leading figures of the inn for a joint meeting. Since he as the innkeeper was not going to be available, and he as Lex was going to be busy, it was important to set up systems for all the workers to be able to handle any potential problems in the upcoming time. Setting up a robust transport system was also very important, for unless they figured out how to set up teleportation formations on their own, they would need to come up with other ways to travel. For the first time ever, over 30 workers of the inn gathered in his office. They included members such as Velma and Gerald, but also key members of the planning division, the upcoming battalion, security, and other prominent workers who had made themselves known through exemplary service. Those who had attended countless meetings were more or less relaxed, but the rest were jittery, though they tried their best to hide it. But how could such a thing be hidden from Lex anyway? I am glad you are all here today, because I have an important announcement to make. The Midnight Inn has undergone a new beginning, and many things have changed over this time. Your help in tackling the countless problems we faced has been invaluable, which is why I feel confident in giving you more responsibility. As a result of this new beginning, there are certain matters that require my personal attention for the foreseeable future. During this period, I will not be able to divert any attention to the inn, so any and all problems the inn encounters will have to be handled by you. His words stunned most of the crowd, though predictably, Gerard and Velma were unaffected. They had been with the innkeeper the longest and had absolute faith in him. If he decided that they could deal with any problems they faced, then he had probably already foreseen what problems they would encounter. Now it was just up to them to live up to his expectations. Chapter 10:15. Recognize this? Lex waited until the crowd settled down somewhat from the news of his imminent departure before continuing. He summoned a projection of a map of the region of the inn, clearly marking where the existing settlements were, the numerous landmarks and terrains, as well as things that needed to be looked out for, such as the tribe of the killer mites that only inhabited a certain region. This is the entire territory of the inn. Although the settlements have not covered even 1% of the area, that does not change the fact that all of this is in territory. That means that once a guest enters the inn, he or she can roam this entire area. That then also means that you need to be able to reach any area of the inn. As you can clearly see, there's a lot of wildlife and uncurtailed dangers along these lands for mortals and lower-level cultivators, which is why I want you to put up signs everywhere informing the guests that they may face dangers if they move away from the settlements. At the same time, I want you all to focus on and consider how you can use these open, wild lands to offer new services, and how to make use of them. For example, you can offer safaris to tourists. Or you can offer protected, training excursions for new cultivators to allow them to familiarize themselves with the dangers of the wilderness. But you have to manage this without disturbing the natural balance of these environments, which will be a challenge. You should also plan for how you will respond in case of emergencies, such as the invasion from the minor realm that Luther is currently addressing. This is a great learning opportunity for all of you, and will allow you to gain extensive experience which can help improve the inn in the future. For this period, I will not offer you any guidance, and will only watch. Since I am about to leave, it is best you get in the habit of making decisions yourselves. Only if you make a massive blunder or oversight, will I add any comments. You may begin. Discover new chapters at novelhall.com. Lex took a step back as he watched the numerous workers suddenly grapple with the responsibility that had suddenly been thrust upon them. But the reason these few specifically had been called, and not the rest, was because they had already proven themselves as competent. True to Lex's expectations, they quickly began to divert their attention towards the map and started muttering amongst themselves as they discussed ideas. Naturally, at first, they focused on the few situations that Lex had pointed out, but as he intended for this meeting to be a long one, he hoped that soon they would start discussing their own ideas. Leaving a projection of himself in the room, Lex teleported away. John was still sitting in front of the dragon, scribbling in his book. He no longer looked as confused or tense, and had made considerable progress. It was likely that watching Lex cultivate had given him some inspiration. As he was scribbling, he noticed something and turned around, only to be startled at the sign of the innkeeper approaching him. Innkeeper. I am making progress on the technique, but it will take some more time before I finish. The healing process was not instantaneous, but it did soothe John and as it began the healing process. In fact, it wasn't just the cut that his blood began to heal, but the damage he had accumulated due to the broken system as well. He went from feeling a soul-rending pain to a relaxing warmth almost immediately, though John wasn't able to appreciate it. He became extremely lethargic and his eyes drooped, struggling to stay awake. It was unfortunate that the recovery rooms weren't working, but that would have hardly helped with a soul wound anyway. Instead, he teleported John's body over to Harry's barber shop, where he had a soul pond that would aid in John's recovery. Moreover, Harry's own sorcery would be extremely helpful in aiding and speeding the healing process. Lex had already informed him to expect John soon, so he was not surprised. After ensuring that John was in no danger, Lex turned his attention to the system in his hand. Unlike the previous ones he had seen, this was not a golden, glowing ball. Instead, the color had changed to a bronze, as if it was sick or wilting. He waited for the familiar sound of a system notification, which only came after an uncomfortable delay, clearly indicated the overburdened state of his own system. New notification, new system detected. Analyzing the secondary system. Lone assassin system detected. New notification, lone assassin C+ system detected. In the shadow and in the light, stalk your prey alone and assassinate your targets to receive a boost in strength and prestige. The greater the assassination feat, the greater the feedback you receive, and the more strength you are bestowed. No target is off limits, and no prey is big enough, as the system will guide you on the ultimate path of assassinating even deities. New notification, absorb lone assassin system? Y/N. The lone assassin system? Was that why John had been such a loner before this? Although he knew that the name was just an alias he had been using, Lex decided to stick with the name unless he decided to correct anyone. He had a strong feeling that, alongside his system, John would be leaving his old name behind as well. Lex did not immediately absorb the system, as he still had a few more days with the host attire that he didn't want to squander. But as soon as that time was over, he would not hesitate to absorb it. He wondered how long it would take. But for now, he had another plan. He teleported somewhere else, but this time as Lex and not the Innkeeper. He also did not hide the system, and showed it to the two figures in front of him. Recognize this? Chapter 10:16 What do you want from us? The rhino centaurs had long felt that they were forgotten, which was not necessarily a bad thing. At least they didn't face insane torture or death, which made it easier for them to wait for their rescue. During this time, they spent more or less every waking minute perusing the group chat and its various channels, becoming incredibly active, allowing them to stay up to date with all the latest information. It wasn't as if they had anything better to do anyway. It was a bittersweet experience, for on one hand they were saved from eternal boredom, but on the other hand they had to read about others who were out and about, living their lives. At least they developed some renown during this time. But, recently, they experienced a bit of a roller coaster of emotions. First they elated when they learned that there was progress on their quest, and that the person who had accepted it finally had a lead on a golden key to enter the inn. But as soon as they started to expect a rescue, they received the thoroughly disappointing news that the inn had shut down and stopped accepting guests for an indefinite period. Since then, the silent, standard days that they had gotten used to once again became excruciating and filled with despair. But eventually they were coming to terms with it once more. However, what they did not expect, whatsoever, was to suddenly see someone finally address them regarding something more than just the food they were going to get. What's more, he was holding a system. "Recognize this?" he asked, in a tantalizing tone. The rhino centaur's immediate impulse was to deny everything, but they had spent too long here and had been exposed to a lot of very strange things, not to mention this entirely new, extremely energy-rich area they were in. They had no idea what powers the inn had at its disposal, so the idea of lying was quickly disposed of. Not to mention, they had already been interrogated once regarding systems, and the third of them who had a system had gone missing so long ago. "It's a system," one of the rhinos said gruffly. Even if they were trapped at the mercy of others, it did not mean that they could show weakness. In a way, their own pride was all they had left. "Yes, I recall you all came to the inn with the intention of hunting guests with systems. You even had a way to identify who had a system and who didn't. I put this off for a long while, but how about we discuss how inappropriate your behavior was? To be honest, I put off having this conversation because I was hoping someone would come and rescue you, but it seems I was overthinking." The rhinos froze, and didn't know how to respond to that. The rescuer had been coming, but was locked out. Did the fact that this tiny human had been waiting for them to be rescued mean that he was stronger than him? It was hard to compare. Even though the inn was extremely impressive, and showed them incredible things, the reach of the group chat was not small either. Some of its senior members were famous across the entire universe. They remained completely unaware that, even though Lex had his back turned on them, he could read all the emotional fluctuations their soul was going through, and somewhat guess what was happening in their mind. "It would be best if we can avoid that," one of them finally said. "When we came to the inn, we had no ulterior motives against the inn, and were unaware of the rules. If we are given an opportunity to redeem ourselves, then we will do what we can to aid the inn with whatever it needs. After all, like I said, we had no intentions against the inn when we arrived." The whole process that we went through was quite regrettable, especially considering that a platform such as the deathmatch was already given. We should have just used that. Lex nodded. Yes, it was quite regrettable what happened. Although, the deathmatch was not a service that was created so you can force or harass people into accepting it. Even though John returned from the match recently, and quite successfully I might add, I do believe he was quite irritated at it. Lex did not reveal that John was crippled as a result. His intention was just to reveal to them that the final member of their party was also dead, so that they give up on having any thoughts of waiting for external help. As for matters of redemption, well, it's not completely off the table, but I think we should put that aside for now. You may not be aware, but the inn has shut down all teleportation services in and out of the inn for the foreseeable future. It might be years before they open back up. Instead, I think we should talk about making your time here at the inn more bearable, enjoyable, even. How does that sound? As long as you obey the rules and don't cause any issues, I'll let you roam the lands freely, eat good food, interact with the people, and even cultivate again. How does that sound? How easily Lex dismissed the topic of their redemption unnerved them, but his offer was too good to be ignored. Even if they could interact with others through the group chat and weren't exactly restricted in that sense, there was no comparison to actually being free. What do you need from us? Chapter 10:17 Systems. Lex smiled upon hearing the question. Talking to them was already plenty informative without them revealing anything at all. He learned that they were expecting a rescue, but they were suddenly greatly disappointed by something. Lex could only assume that they learned of the teleportation ban, which then upset them because it delayed their rescue. New N0vel chapters are published at novelhall.com. It was also interesting to learn that in spite of everything they had learned about the inn, they retained quite a bit of confidence in being rescued. Clearly their background was not simple, despite themselves being quite weak. Although they had been taken aback by Lex's casual offer, and were unnerved by the system, they quickly gathered themselves and became somewhat composed. What do I need from you? Shouldn't it be obvious? Lex questioned back, and showed them a knowing smile. As if to add emphasis to what he was saying, he became a little more obvious with his movements in throwing and catching the system. We don't have any systems, one of the rhinocentaurs said, but became quiet when Lex gave him a look as if he were looking at an idiot. Look, the more you reveal willingly, the more freedoms I'll allow you. I'm trying to be nice about this, but if you waste my time I'll let someone handle you too. Maybe the baby Cthulhu. He feeds on the pain and suffering of others, or something along those lines, and his mother has been really concerned about his insufficient diet. You wouldn't want to attract their attention now, would you? In fact, the truth was far from what Lex had portrayed. Since he arrived in this new realm, the baby Cthulhu had been exceptionally excited, and had been feeding non-stop without needing to actively harm anyone himself. He had been gaining some weight even. The rhinocentaurs trembled just a bit. Of course they knew about Cthulhus. In fact, one of the top 500 members of the group chat had a taming Cthulhus to cultivate system, which made them especially well known. Alright, well, how about we focus on systems? Tell me everything you can, and we'll go from there. Systems have, for as far as anyone can tell, always existed, from the earliest days of the universe. Obviously for people like us it's hard to get in contact with anyone from the primary realm, the very first realm that was created alongside the universe itself, but ancient records show signs of things that might be systems even back then. No one knows the origins of systems, so it is heavily speculated that systems are naturally occurring and are born with every new realm. Although that theory is heavily contested, owing to the fact that fewer and fewer newborn systems have been discovered in recent years. What do you mean by newborn systems? Lex asked. Most systems you will encounter will be between E and a grade, and will have already been through a number of other hosts. Depending on how much time has passed between a system having a previous host, and treating you as one, you might be able to inherit what the system was previously, or have a new type of system created for you. But a system which has never had a host before is called a newborn system, and it is at its weakest state. It also needs to be noted that depending on the grade of a system, their preference for host species will also change. A lower grade system will not synchronize well with a species with a high inherent cultivation level. Lex absorbed the information, and finally received an answer he had long been wondering about. Every system he encountered would be the same for him as its previous host, but the Midnight Inn system seemed to have been different when it was with Mary. This piece of information made no difference to him, as his only purpose was to absorb systems to allow him to heal, but others might choose to wait if the system they encountered was incompatible with themselves. Of course, this was on the premise that they had such information available to them. Chapter 1018 Deal. It was also curious that a low-grade system would avoid beings with higher inherent cultivation levels, meaning the cultivation level they were born with. In that case, shouldn't his system have preferred someone else with a higher realm? It still made more sense to merge with Batet than himself. But perhaps due to its severely damaged state, it was behaving like a low-grade or newborn system. I've heard that systems prefer to merge with mortals, or those with lower-grade cultivation levels. Doesn't that pose an issue for you while searching for systems to absorb? The two rhino-centaurs looked at Lex with confusion. We've never heard of a system choosing a host, so we're not sure about that. Maybe our level is too low to get in contact with such information. But most of the folks I know actively search for systems themselves and fuse with them, so while it may result in less than perfect synchronization, it still works. Even for those who accidentally got a system, by dropping blood on it in its sealed state for example, are usually initiating the merging process themselves, even if they don't know it at the time. What else do you know about systems? Discover new chapters at novelhall.com. That, they serve as a shortcut to growing stronger? They make it easier to get access to incredibly rare treasures, though their quests are not easy to complete. For us common folk with no background, it's immensely useful. However, for higher cultivation level beings or those with large backgrounds on the universal level, they might not be so attractive. After all, everything a system can do, high-leveled cultivators can do on their own. For a system to tempt them, it would have to be truly a very high-level one, but I've never heard of a system going above a grade, so it's very unlikely. Besides that, there are ways to make your system stronger by absorbing other systems, but that has a limit. For example, there is only so much growth a B-rank system can get from absorbing an E-rank system. Once that limit is reached, absorbing more of such graded systems yields no results. I've heard rumors that certain people also upgraded their systems using exceptionally rare items they found from ancient ruins or from minor realms that had been sealed for eons, but those are just rumors. There's no proof to support such a claim. Lex frowned, which scared the rhino-centaurs a bit. He could tell they were telling the truth, but if they could not search for signs of systems across his new realm, then he had little to no use of them for now. How could he possibly gain from this situation? How could he use them to improve his chances of restoring his system in some way? Honestly speaking, he couldn't come up with an answer to that question. But, upon thinking a bit, he did come up with a possible theory. He had no proof of it whatsoever, and it was a complete long shot, but at the same time, he found it hard to deny that it was possible. The rhino-centaur's confidence despite seeing the scale of the inn, their assurance that they would be rescued, their extensive knowledge about systems, the fact that they even dared to insinuate that even the innkeeper might not be able to remove their restrictions, all created a situation where Lex could believe a certain possibility. He had already been informed by the mysterious man who guided him and told him how to fix Regal Embrace also mentioned a group chat for system users. He could believe that a group of mysterious system hunters were possibly connected to exactly such a group chat. But it would be too coincidental. How could he run into them already? But at the same time, the fact that the mystery man had even warned him might mean that he foresaw exactly such an interaction in his future. When he reached that thought, he was willing to make an attempt. He looked at the two rhino-centaurs, who were nervously staring at him. It was a funny sight, two massive, hulking creatures looking at a tiny human baby with fear. All right, I believe you. I won't ask you any more questions on this matter for now. Instead, I'll offer you a deal. As long as you can fulfill the conditions of this deal, you can continue to enjoy freedom. At the same time, no one will ask you how exactly you're fulfilling it either. But if you fail even once, then it's straight back to prison for you. So what do you think? Are you interested in such a deal? Chapter 1019 Blackmail. The rhino centaurs felt like laughing. Were they even in a position to reject any single offer? Clearly, Lex could pressure them however he wanted and they would most likely obey. After all, no one would want to be locked up, unable to move for years on end without anything to do. Not to mention, if they were given free rein to roam around in the inn, they could share information about it on their group chat and hopefully increase their chances of a rescue somehow. Can you share the specifics of the deal? They asked hesitantly. After all, Lex couldn't expect them to agree to the deal without knowing the details, right? Fortunately, while Lex was fully ready to take advantage of them, he was not sadistic about it. It's nothing too difficult or major. Just share one piece of news from somewhere else in the universe every day. It has to be a significant piece of news, not something random like little Timmy broke his first tooth or something along those lines. The rhino centaurs froze. Although it was not stating this out loud, wasn't this more or less accusing them of having the group chat? No, wait, there was no need to jump to conclusions. Is there some kind of interrealm portal or news network available? Or perhaps some information merchants? A universal outlet of some kind? Naturally not, Lex said, as if it was the most obvious answer. The borders of the Midnight Inn are shut down, and no one can come in or go out. It is the same for any regular means of contact outside. Then how are we supposed to share news from other realms? Hey, I already said that I won't ask how you do it. That also means it's none of my concern. Do not worry, when you share the news we will have means of knowing whether you're telling the truth or lying. This deal is also separate for both of you, meaning each of you will have to deliver a piece of unique news from the outside universe. As long as you can do that, you can be free. How does that sound? It's simple, right? A silence hung between them as neither Lex nor the rhinocentaur spoke. How was this simple? This was the height of unreasonableness. Unless he already knew about the group chat. The most ingenious thing was that by saying he wouldn't ask how they got the news, he had created a way for them to deliver it without exposing the chat. But if they did, they would indirectly reveal it. While such a situation would not cause them to suffer any backlash, as there was always room for misunderstandings, it scared them even more than the thought of being tortured. So the Midnight Inn was aware of the group chat, yet at the same time did not hesitate to blackmail the two of them. Was it really such a significant force? Did they really not fear retaliation? It had to be known that while what they said was true, which was that high-level cultivators don't covet systems, they also said that systems allow cultivators to grow stronger much faster. That meant that there were more than just a few experts in their group chat, including Dao Lords. The last few days with his powers left him feeling slightly nervous as he was hoping to prepare as much as possible. At a certain point, he even stopped to wonder why he was feeling this nervousness when he had gotten so used to dealing with catastrophes and unexpected issues. The only reasonable answer he could come up with was that, much like John, he had built a subconscious dependence on the reliability of the system. Now that it was going away, even temporarily, he could not help but become agitated. But he found such a glaring weakness in himself unacceptable, so he forced himself to confront the feelings head-on. It did not really help, but he continued to do it nonetheless. Eventually, though, the time eventually came. His host attire was about to lose its powers. He did not perform a grand goodbye, or make his departure known. Besides Mary, no one knew when he took it off and the innkeeper disappeared. Until he healed the system, he would be the innkeeper no more. It was a strange thought. He was too used to being the innkeeper. Even though he acted as Lex much longer, he somehow felt that his time as the innkeeper was always more impactful. But the truth was, underneath, he was always Lex. It was important to remember that, lest he develop some kind of split personality. He absorbed the lone assassin system as well, just before departing. Even the familiar interface of the system, which would stay with him despite the host attire powering off, disappeared. It would return once his system absorbed the other one. Hopefully he would get a big percentage boost, considering this system was C+, which was a very high rank. He teleported back to the sealed domain and looked at it. "You ready to look for the entrance, pal?" he asked. "Master, I've been thinking all this time. It's highly unusual for this domain to not have multiple entrances. It's a basic requirement to keep the domain functioning. But I realized that was only the case if the domain was natural and self-sustaining. If someone else set it up purposefully, and are powering it themselves, then there is no such requirement." "What does that mean? That there might not be an entrance at all?" "Well, we will need to investigate. But, I have some theories about who, or which race, could achieve such a thing." Chapter 10:20 Beloved Races. While Lex was observing the sealed domain, and discussing its possibilities with Pell, back in the Midnight Inn, the two rhino centaurs were giving their daily news. Lex had already informed Velma about the details of their agreement, and informed her to record everything they said. Whenever he returned from his various tasks, he would take his time to check the veracity of the news they submitted, mostly by reading their soul language as he asked them about each piece of news. The reason he told Velma about it was because since she ran the midnight newsletters, he thought she'd find it interesting, and could maybe add it to the newsletter if the information was relevant or interesting. Since Velma was involved, she naturally informed Anita as well. The beautiful Lich, who was these days getting accustomed to motherhood, had not forgotten that she was also tasked with recording history in the Midnight Library. As such, she was also present when they shared the news, and recorded it all down. Something interesting, however, was that Lex had been very particular in his choice of words when discussing this deal with the Rhino Centaurs. He had asked them to share news about the universe. That seemed very general, but because the Rhino Centaurs did not want to risk their freedom, they searched the group chat for channels open to all members for universal updates. As such, for the first time ever, the Midnight Inn came in touch with news about universal powers, rather than just powers limited to a single realm. The Celestial Court has set a precedent by allowing half-bloods to apply for bloodline purification based on merits, one of the rhinos informed. As a result, countless realms have applied for recognition, pledging allegiance to the Celestial Court as long as the realm owners can undergo purification, the other said. Neither of them elaborated too much on the news they shared, but they both counted as important pieces of news that defined the trends of the entire universe. Not all the news they shared had been as monumental as this, but slowly and steadily, through them, the inn's records about the powers of the universe began to grow. At the same, Lex was still having a discussion with Pell. "Who do you suspect can create such a domain?" Lex asked as he slowly approached the walls of the sealed domain. "First, I need to explain something. A domain and a formation seem similar in function, but they are not the same. A formation performs a function, or maybe even a series of functions depending on the complexity of the formation itself." By now, Lex had already arrived at the barrier of the domain, and even tried touching it. Despite being in a soul state, he could not just travel through the walls of the domain. "Well, we will need to look for a specific solution for this domain. In the meantime, we can still look for possible entrances. We haven't explored all of it yet, so maybe we'll encounter something." "This might take a while," Lex said as he began blinking forward. He would only teleport a fixed distance so that all his senses were constantly covering the domain. "Pell, why don't you pass me all the glyphs you've compiled so far while we search? That dragon's breath sounds impressive. What else do you have?" There were only a few beginner-level glyphs that Lex could use, for his domination level was still too weak to use them all. But halfway into learning them, Lex decided not to focus too much on the combat-oriented ones, besides Dragon's Breath of course. This was because he really needed to focus on his sword intent. But while there weren't many he could use now, there were quite a few that interested him. For example, one of the dragon race's greatest abilities, which was hardly ever talked about, was their passive growth. The greater and more valuable their hoard, the quicker their cultivation would grow. There was a glyph which produced a similar effect, and the best part was that it didn't need to be actively maintained, or even used on by the creator. That meant that Lex could use the glyph and bestow it to someone else. Still, they would need to own many valuable things to grow. But for someone like Lex, whose massive wealth did not match his actual meager strength, this was not a bad technique. Of course, one could argue that he was already growing much too fast. But that still was just one example of the many glyphs that awaited him. While he searched for an entrance, a small part of his brain was focused on learning the new information Pell passed to him. The odd timing of such multitasking was a reflection of the kind of pressure Lex was under. In a little over 380 days he had to fulfill this quest or lose the system forever. It was not nearly as bad as the quests he got that threatened death, but he had too much that he didn't want to lose now. Exactly 1 day later, Lex had searched the entire surface of the domain at his fastest speed possible. There was no entrance. Well, now what? Lex asked. Now, we use the rules of this domain against it. Don't worry, I was studying it as well while we searched. I have a few ideas. Chapter 1021 Entering the Domain. The sealed domain was like a massive cube, with all sides sealed perfectly. It did not even give off an aura, and if it hadn't been for Wyrm's glyph, Lex never would have found it. It absorbed no spiritual energy, and gave off none either. According to Pell, that meant that it had formed the perfect cycle within it, achieving zero loss of energy and recycling everything. Such a case was unbelievable, and only further strengthened Pell's belief that the ones responsible for it were fairies. But the thing about fairies was that if they were completely infallible, they never would have fallen so low. He could not comment on what they were like at their peak, but at least as things stood today, their abilities had certain flaws that were simple enough to take advantage of. Pell transmitted another set of exercises to Lex, this time also focused on domination, though not for a glyph. Instead, it was a more enhanced way to use the technique. Lex had already been using domination for similar purposes, but he had been doing it like an amateur. It was as if he had been using a sword for a long time, only to be told that he had to remove the scabbard first for maximum effect. With the proper guidance on hand, Lex quickly learned how to make best use of the technique, and began to display it. Previously, the reason Lex would slam down domination where he wished to use it was because of the impact dragons might had on him. He had barely survived just the passive dragons might given off, so he imagined that when properly used, the aura was even more overwhelming. He was both right and wrong. The reason he was right was because when used properly, it would have been much more powerful, making it so that it would have been impossible for Lex to achieve the feats that he had. But he was also wrong because, well, in the end, aura was just aura. To a dragon, their aura was just a passive way to display their prominent status while eliminating those unworthy to even stand in their presence. It was the literal tip of the iceberg when it came to their abilities. Just the thickness of the sealed domain barrier must have been at least a mile long. When he finally reached the end, he passed through a thin film that seemed to separate the outside and the inside. As soon as he passed through, Lex felt the difference. It felt like he was no longer within the midnight realm as he noted a number of differences. First off, the gravity was about half the strength of the realm. Secondly, the ambient spiritual energy was also weaker. But, that hardly made a difference as it was still more concentrated than most places Lex had visited before. In fact, due to the spiritual energy being weaker, Lex felt like the environment here was much better and clearer. Third, he felt a number of restrictions trying to lock onto him. They had to keep their distance because of the aura he was emitting, but they were constantly trying to find a way to latch onto him. He did not feel that the restrictions were particularly powerful or harmful, so he slowly ended his technique and allowed them to latch onto his body. After all, each domain had special rules, according to Pell. As long as he acted within those rules, he would have an easier time. If, however, he kept breaking the rules, then the domain would specifically start targeting him. As interested as he was in exploring this domain, his primary interest was in locating the resin. Preferably, he should have already found the resin by the time his system upgrade from absorbing the lone assassin system finishes. That way, he would immediately be able to test if the resin worked. He felt the restrictions latch onto him and empower him? Lex felt incredibly confused as he felt a projection of a gold crown appear around his forehead, a diamond-shaped golden crystal embedded right in its center. Chapter 1022 Mysterious and Powerful Lex. Lex felt slightly confused as he did not understand the purpose of the crown, though he did however inherit some knowledge pertaining to it when it appeared. More specifically, he learned how to control it so that he could make it appear or disappear. The crown also had some kind of ability which he could use at will, though he did not know what the ability did. He tried using it immediately, but noticed no change. Putting his thoughts about the crown aside, Lex observed the space within the domain. It did not appear as if he was underground at all. Instead, it seemed like he was floating in the sky amidst the clouds, and far below him was the ground. His eyes followed the natural contours of the land below, and found it more familiar than that of the Midnight Realm. Although the plants were still that of the realm, this place seemed more similar to Earth than not. He spread out his spirit sense to get a feel for the area, and detected an abundance of wildlife in the lands below, most of them below the Foundation realm. He also, for the first time in this realm, saw humans. Within the scope of his spirit sense, there were just 2 of them, and though he sensed that they were quite young, their builds were much greater than those of humans from Earth. The 2 humans, a boy and a girl, seemed to be fighting each other within a forest. Both were nearly 7 feet, 2.1 meters, tall and had extremely large muscles. Though they were nowhere near as muscular as Marlowe at his peak, compared to normal humans it looked like they had been injecting steroids day and night. Pell, you told me you had a shape-shifting technique for humans? Although I am a human already, do you have a technique that will allow me to change my body shape? He did not want to deal with the hassle of coming in front of other humans looking like a baby. It would be much easier if he could return to his former appearance. Yet while he saw the attack aiming for the girl, he missed the signs of the animal attacking him. From the ground a small creature suddenly burst out and bit into the man's foot. He screamed and lost his balance, which gave the girl the opportunity she needed. She stabbed forward, coincidentally moving out of the way of the snake at just the right time. She managed to stab the boy's neck, killing him, but instantly realized that her situation was not great. A 3-way standoff appeared as the snake, the half-buried creature and the girl warily looked at each other. Lex felt that the opportunity was perfect for him to act like a mysterious and unknown powerhouse. He'd always been the one receiving help from those stronger than him, which is why now that he had gained a bit of strength, he had been feeling the urge to do the same. Using his spirit sense, he transmitted an image as well as information about a sword attack to the girl. The girl did not know what was happening. She just had a strong feeling, and visualized an attack in her mind that would end the standoff. She did not know where the thought came from, but her gut told her that it would work, so she did not hesitate. She took a step forward, and just as she had visualized, the snake and the ground creature both lunged at her. Her hands moved with precision she never knew she had as she recreated the attack perfectly, managing to behead both creatures in one move. Then she froze as disbelief gripped her. Had she really done that? Chapter 1023 Life on Hacks. The girl stood frozen over the decapitated bodies of the 2 animals, in shock at her own performance. Lex himself was quite intrigued by the scene as well. Although, to him, this level of combat was akin to child's play, and guiding the girl the way he did required not even a moment of consideration, watching her succeed and perform above her level gave him some kind of unusual satisfaction. Moreover, he almost felt as if he got a new perception on swordplay watching someone else perform his moves. The level of guidance was still too superficial, and there was no real progress, but Lex considered if teaching someone swordplay could help him advance his own sword intent somehow. After a few moments, the girl woke up from her stupor and immediately got to work. She summoned a projection of an iron band around her forehead, though the projection seemed as if it was mostly covered in rust, and grabbed the twitching head of the ground animal. She did something and it seemed that a single grain of rust fell off her projection, revealing a speck more of iron. She repeated the process with the snake's head, as well as that of the dead boy. The snake did not contribute much to her projection, though whatever she did, it worked better with the boy, as it removed an entire chunk of rust. Perhaps it worked better among their own race, or maybe the boy was actually stronger. Lex did not understand the purpose of the projection, though he could tell that she was upgrading it somehow. His own was, obviously, a much higher level than hers, but even so he felt no obvious benefits from it. The girl searched the boy's body and, after stripping it of all its valuables, began to march through the forest. She was exhausted, but clearly she had no time to rest. Lex was intrigued. He debated on what he should do next. He could ignore the girl and begin to search the domain secretly for the resin. But he figured he had at least a few days before his system came back online, which was more than enough time to search the entire domain. In that case, it wouldn't hurt to learn more about this place. He could do it on his own. After all, he only needed to find a settlement of some sort and spread his spirit sense over it. He'd learn everything he needed from the countless conversations taking place, or the information recorded in books and documents. At his current level, he could pay attention to multiple conversations and read a number of documents without losing focus, so it was simple enough. But Lex didn't want to give up the opportunity to act like a mysterious expert and secretly help out the girl, assuming she wasn't some kind of crazy serial killer. After all, he had been too tense lately. Letting loose and enjoying himself a bit wasn't necessarily a bad thing. With that decided, Lex smiled and continued to observe the girl. She never stopped moving, though she picked a number of fruits from the forest and ate while moving. She was clearly familiar with the local area. It didn't take her long to reach what looked like her hideout, which was to say a tree where she had laid some poorly chopped planks to give herself a bit of flat area to sleep on. A number of bags were hung from various branches in the tree which she all collected before leaving. The hideout was too shoddy to have been used for too long. If Lex had to guess, he'd say she was using it as a home base while she hunted or something while staying in the region. For the next few hours Lex followed the girl, while at the same time absorbing information about the local area. "How did you get so far from the city to begin with?" she asked warily. "Don't you have any guides? You don't look like a hunter." "No, not really. I was heading towards Torrenwood for some business, but I'm thoroughly lost." Torrenwood was the name of the city he detected. He withdrew his spirit sense from the city after learning its name. The game wouldn't be fun if he learned everything through his spirit senses. He wanted to learn about everything naturally. Once he was done being mysterious, and wanted to get back to work, he could just spread his spirit sense then. "Torrenwood is just a few hours from here," she said warily. The man did not look like a traveler. Where were his supplies? "I can take you there, but I don't work for free." Lex scratched his head. Was she negotiating with someone lost in the forest? Minus points. That's one less secret technique for her. "Sure, I can pay." "How much?" "I won't charge too much," the girl said, hiding the guilt in her voice. "How's 5 coppers?" "Sure, no problem," Lex said as he got up. "Let me grab my bag." He spread his spirit sense across the forest and found countless corpses belonging to hunters, most likely buried underground. Many of them still had their belongings, including coin purses. Being strong as life on hacks, he muttered to himself as he accumulated several dozen gold coins worth of local currency in half a second. He walked to the side of the tree that was not visible to the girl and pulled out a travel bag. He had already shifted the countless coin purses to his spatial bangle, and then into this bag for convenience. After reaching in, he pulled out 5 coins and handed it to the girl. The ease with which Lex handed money over, and his amicable attitude made the girl even more suspicious, but since he had paid, she would lead him. "Follow me, we're not going to stop till we reach the city." "Can you fight?" "There's still many wild beasts in this forest, and the money I took is just to lead you to the city, not protect you." "Oh, I'll manage." Chapter 1024 Torren and Wood. In the middle of an extravagant, circular chamber, with every inch of its surface covered in formations, sat a fairy on a throne with its eyes closed. The amount of energy coursing through its body at any given moment was hundreds of times what even Lex could tolerate, yet the fair seemed unharmed. It was a completely different matter altogether that the fairy struggled immensely, and for nearly an hour, before it was finally able to crack open a single eye. The golden crown has appeared, its thoughts transmitted out loud. Our chance has come. Just that single sentence has thoroughly exhausted it, and wrinkles appeared on its face and its hair turned white. But such a scene lasted only a brief moment, as the endless flowing energy in its body allowed it to recover back to its original state. It seemed like nothing had happened, and no one was in the chamber with it to hear its thoughts, but there was nothing else the fairy could do. It remained on its throne, sitting with its head held high, its back straight, appearing regal, yet a prisoner nonetheless. The first beast they encountered was a wolf. It gave Lex flashbacks of running for his life from wolves in a forest back on Nibiru. Now though, the wolf's growling, glaring face just looked cute to Lex. The girl, whose name was Hildy, did not feel the same. She did not hesitate to scream at the wolf aggressively, and make herself look big, which was not a challenge, really. Her attempts to intimidate the wolf did not work, as two more pulled out from behind some more trees. That seemed to make the girl nervous, but she still didn't run. She drew her sword and looked at Lex nervously, to see if he was ready for battle. He was not. "How about I take care of this one?" Lex said, stepping forward, uncaring about how startled the girl was. It was quite refreshing to be the strongest one around for once. He had long gotten used to being surrounded by overwhelmingly powerful beings, which is why he was never able to let loose completely. But the more time he was spending in the Midnight Realm, the more he was beginning to open up. Not so long ago, a few nascent realm cultivators ruled all of Earth, and he was most definitely stronger than them. Your crown level? It's really high, isn't it? Wouldn't be surprised if it was silver. No wonder you're fine in the forest alone. Beasts are all intimidated by high crown levels. Lex raised an eyebrow. So beasts were intimidated, but the same did not extend to humans. I've never been to Tornwood. Is it common to share information like that openly here? Hildy looked away, feeling slightly guilty. You know, never mind. You're right, it's a private matter. Thanks for taking care of the wolves, but we should go. Pack animals are the hardest to deal with. We don't want to be here if they come back with the whole pack. The pack did not return. In fact, Lex wouldn't be surprised if they just migrated out of the forest after being exposed to Lex's aura. But they were attacked by a number of other creatures. This time, Lex did not shoo them away, and gave Hildy small bits of inspiration throughout the fights, drastically improving her skills. She had no idea what was happening, and clearly she was equal parts confused and excited. Naturally, since Hildy made all the kills, she was the one to use all of them to improve her crown. She explained that rule to Lex before doing it, and he didn't particularly mind. But even by the time they exited the forest, it had hardly made a difference to the amount of rust on her projection. This was clearly a long-term project. Can you tell me a little about Tornwood? Anything I should look out for? I'm not too familiar with the area. The city is run by two families. Well, it's actually run by the city council, but in effect, two families own almost everything in the city. You're not going to believe it, but they're the Torin and Wood families. You want to stay away from both of them, by the way. Total pricks. If you run into a member from their families, what you're going to want to do is turn the other way and leave. Chapter 1025 Taking Notes. Wow, you must really like them, Lex said sarcastically as they walked from the edge of the forest to the city entrance. It was decently sized and was built on both sides of a river that was passing by. There was a short line at the gate that they were walking towards. It's just a suggestion. It's not really that hard. Despite their power, both families aren't too large, so the chances of actually running into one of them is quite low. What you're doing right now is called raising a flag. You're basically ensuring that you'll run into one of them, if not both of them, pretty soon, said Lex casually. What? Hildy asked, confused. Raising a flag. It's a superstition. Basically stating something you hope to avoid only sets you up to face it pretty soon. There are a few other rules to it, like raising death flags, red flags, green flags, and such, But in essence, the more you want to avoid something, the more you'll end up facing it. I don't believe in them though. Then why did you bring it up? No reason in particular. Just that the last time I raised a flag for myself, I lost my skin. All of it. Gone. Was not a fun experience. Still don't believe in them though. Alright, if you say so. Well, I brought you to Tornwood. Toll to enter is 2 copper coins. Good luck with your endeavors. I have some business of my own to take care of, so I should get going. Lex nodded, and then watched her leave. She was clearly distracted with other things, which left Lex feeling dissatisfied. He hadn't learned anything significant, nor had he acted mysteriously enough. Lex immediately focused in and began taking notes. Perhaps such a ridiculous novel was not the best place to take notes from. A part of him reminded himself that he was on a time limit. But he was so tempted. In the end, he allowed himself one day at most to do as he wished. Relaxing might actually help him perform better in the long run. After that, though, he would continue his search, and take whatever opportunity he got to behave cryptically as the opportunity arose. With that out of the way, he began taking notes guilt-free. So a black hood to hide his identity, appearing and disappearing out of nowhere, using techniques that bewilder the audience. He was not about to put his soul into a necklace, but he could drop some kind of amazing inheritance inside some piece of jewelry and auction it off. Apparently auctions were very integral to acting mysterious. The most important thing, however, was to donate the item that would ultimately sell as the last item on the auction, getting a VIP booth as a result, and then buying some things while everyone else guessed his identity. In the actual novel itself, there was a whole lot more face slapping involved, but Lex found that terribly unrealistic. How was he supposed to randomly encounter people, spoiled to the extent of stupidity, who would just come and start fights with him? He'd kept his spirit sense spread around him to observe if such scenes were common, and fortunately they weren't. However, the roll of the crowns was extensive. He still did not know what their actual use was, but they had created some kind of caste system where people with higher quality projections were treated better than others. More importantly, his assumption had also proved correct. People were a lot more open to fighting and killing here, all in the name of improving their projections. Fortunately, most of that killing was targeted towards animals and beasts, but not all of it. Lex took a bite out of a pie that had been placed in front of him, among other things, and continued to read when the doors to the tavern were slammed open. I'm reserving this goddamn place, so all of you get the hell out. Chapter 1026 Concrete Wall. Lex paused, and so did a few other guests. They turned to look at the door to discover a gang of hoodlums walking in. They were dressed in shoddy leather armor, and were carrying a number of weapons on their belts. Lex suddenly recalled what the book said about such situations. First was the direct confrontation, where the main character would not back off because his code would not allow him to take a step back or some such. That didn't suit Lex's style. Next was to ignore them and continue eating until they came to pick on him, then defeat them effortlessly and continue to read his book. Lex looked at his table, and it was still filled with food he hadn't eaten yet. Yes, he liked that idea. He was going to pay in advance if you want to book the place, the bartender said in an unimpressed tone. It seemed like he had seen plenty of such actions. Do you think I'm poor? How dare you? It's your honor to be able to serve me, the leader of the gang yelled as he slammed his fist on the counter. The bartender sighed, and grabbed his own sword. That's when he revealed his aura as a Foundation realm expert, and sliced the entire gang in one hit. They weren't dead, but they were definitely seriously injured. The guests turned back to their food, as if they were used to such a scene. Lex also turned back to his book, slightly disappointed. So the bartender was a secret expert, going by local standards. Or perhaps not so secret. What Lex couldn't figure out was why everyone in this place was so irritable. He'd already witnessed a dozen or so fights with his spirit sense, all starting from menial issues. He looked at the dozen or so bodies being dragged about by the waitresses. What was the need for acting so absurdly? Lex couldn't understand. His spirit sense picked something else up. Another group was coming towards the tavern, and they looked better dressed than the hoodlums, though their expressions were just as mean. The group arrived just in time to watch as the bodies of the hoodlums were being dragged out, and froze. Then they walked in, ignoring the bodies. Standing at the door, the group surveyed the entire tavern. It was not the best establishment, but it had its fair share of customers, and the food was good. The leader nodded to his men, who spread out, while the leader himself walked towards the bartender. Although he was keeping his aura suppressed, Lex could tell that he was in the Foundation realm as well. The bartender also noticed, and his bored expression changed, though just a little. "I said, mealtime is over," the man reiterated, leaning forward. Everyone in the room had turned to look at them. No one had seriously resisted the thugs, but it seemed things were about to escalate. A tinge of excitement filled the guests who were about to leave. One way or another, they were about to see a show. Lex merely looked at the guy, making eye contact with him, before the man's eyes rolled back into his head and he collapsed. In fact, it was not just him. All the other thugs in the room collapsed, including the Foundation cultivation expert. Everyone in the room froze. What had just happened? Nobody had seen Lex make a move. He just looked at the man, and everyone collapsed. "Can you refresh all my food?" Lex said to the waitress. "Put it on this gentleman's tab." "Sure thing," she said cheerily, and began picking up Lex's plates. She'd seen too many fights to be deterred by such things, though she could not help but let her gaze linger on Lex. He was a little thin for her tastes, but then again, for someone that powerful, she could adjust her tastes. She winked at Lex as she stepped over the body on the floor. Lex turned his attention back to his book. He had made his opening gambit. Rumors of a mystery man would surely spread, even if a little slowly, from this incident. Now what he needed to do was capitalize on this, and continue to behave very mysteriously. Lex ignored the gaze that the bartender gave him, and continued to read his book while he made more plans. But, he had a feeling that he wouldn't need to do anything to get what he wanted. Considering his luck, he was sure to get embroiled in something soon enough, and considering the temperament of the folks around town, he had a feeling that he was about to begin slapping some faces pretty soon. The thugs wouldn't wake up any time soon after all. He blasted them all with a sliver of domination, so whatever they had planned was probably foiled. After eating his meal, Lex casually left the tavern, giving the barkeep a nod. After scanning the city, he had not been able to find an auction house, or any ongoing auctions, but he did find a very prestigious-looking building that served a few purposes. It offered commissions for anyone willing to take up dangerous jobs, as well as served as a point to sell and buy goods as well as information. It was a strange combination, but Lex was considering how stunned everyone would be if he completed all the commissions. As it turned out, the moment he stepped out of the tavern, so did the two girls from the opposite building. Their pure white clothes stood out amongst the dirt and muck-covered clothes of people in this part of the city, as did their weak physique compared to the others in the city that is. "How dare you gaze upon the young lady so lecherously," a guard yelled at Lex when he saw him looking, and suddenly drew his sword. The young girls themselves were quite startled by the yelling guard and turned to look over. Lex did not move at all, and instead observed the guard as he swung his sword towards Lex's neck. His eyes were filled with cunning and anticipation. Clearly he had a reason for trying to stand out. Lex did not break eye contact with the man even as the sword came and hit Lex's neck, before bouncing off as if it had hit a concrete wall. Chapter 1027 Simple Life. Lex felt slightly amused as he saw the changing emotions of the man who attacked him. Although he did not know what the reason behind attacking Lex was, he could tell that he had chosen Lex because, of everyone else on the street, he looked like the easiest target. After all, almost everyone else was taller than him, not to mention more muscular than him. Compared to everyone else, Lex looked truly malnourished. But that was probably just because the humans here were probably just a subrace of humans that were taller and more muscular. It made sense actually, considering they had to cope with a higher gravity. If they had no way to cultivate, then they may have ended up shorter than other humans. But, since they cultivated, were focused on body cultivation, and lived in such an energy-rich area, they grew to be tall and strong. That did not, however, mean that others were weak. The guard who attacked Lex recoiled back and held onto his right hand, which was trembling, and looked at Lex in shock. "What's happening here?" yelled another guard as he pulled out his sword, but did not rush to attack. The two girls were also intrigued, and though a number of guards surrounded them to protect them, they kept watching. "Sir, I caught him glaring at the two young mistresses, and suspected something was amiss. Then I saw him try to attack, and rushed to stop him, but he's stronger than I expected. He knocked my sword from my hand." The other guard looked at Lex warily, though there was a trace of doubt in his eyes. According to what Lex had read, this was a perfect opportunity to act mysterious. He just needed to stick around, get into a verbal fight with the guard, establish his moral superiority before attacking the guard and possibly uncover some kind of underhanded plot. But now that he was in this situation himself, he discovered that it was kind of lame. The guy had attacked Lex, so why did he need to justify anything to retaliate? Moreover, just the thought of trying to convince everyone he was innocent and the guard was guilty sounded exhausting. "Don't waste my time," Lex said to the guard who attacked him, and flashed him with domination, causing him to froth at the mouth and fall unconscious. Instead of sticking around, Lex teleported away to the commission building. It was only after he teleported away that it occurred to Lex that the guard might have been cooperating with the thugs who tried to book the tavern. Maybe he was trying to create a scene as a signal for them to act. He shrugged, and decided not to worry about it, and instead entered the building. Read latest chapters at novelhall.com. Since he had withdrawn his spirit sense, Lex missed the reaction to his disappearance, which alarmed those who were watching even more than the sudden fainting of the guard. Afraid for his life, others checked up on the guard, only to discover a number of unusual items on his person, including a knife with a strange marking on it and a couple of bottles of unmarked medicine. Once he hit that 1-hour mark, Lex walked back into the Simple Life building, lugging a massive bag over his shoulder. Although Lex attracted a lot of attention, he ignored it and got back in the queue to report his completed commissions. There were other, shorter lines, but Lex decided to stick with Henry. "How you doing, Henry?" Lex asked, when it was finally his turn. "I'm just here to report that I'm done with all the commissions. I brought all the harvested parts as well. Just let me know where to drop them." You what?" Henry asked, as he looked up at Lex in shock. It almost sounded like Lex had said he completed all the accepted commissions. That was over 100 of them. The massive bag he was carrying seemed to reinforce that thought, but it must be a mistake. "I said I completed all the tasks and brought the harvested stuff. Where can I have them checked out?" "The room to the left." "No, wait, I'll take you there myself," Henry said, once he woke up from his stupor. Henry quickly left his station and walked out from behind the counter, and led Lex to a room on the side. There were a number of booths in the room, most with lines in front of them, and people were bringing stuff in to be appraised in each one. Henry led Lex to one of the larger booths which did not have a line. "This booth is normally only used for grade 4 members and above, but since I'm personally bringing you, it's fine if we use it," Henry explained. Lex found Henry's expression quite amusing. He looked equal parts bewildered and curious. Logic told Henry that it was impossible for Lex to have completed all the tasks he accepted, or even half of them, so quickly. But for some odd reason, he believed Lex. "Hi, can you appraise these goods and confirm they correspond with these commissions?" Henry handed the appraiser a list of the commissions Lex accepted, who was also stunned when he looked at the massive list. Lex only smiled, and put the massive bag he was pulling onto the table. For a moment, the massive bag, much larger than the table or even the people standing in the booth, made for quite a commercial scene. Then the table collapsed under the weight of the bag. "Is this some kind of joke?" the appraiser asked, anger rising in his chest. Was he being made fun of? "No, not really. Can you hurry up? I have more commissions to accept," Lex responded innocently. After all, this was just the beginning of his plan. Chapter 1028 Dread. The appraiser and Henry both looked at Lex like he was a madman, but for completely different reasons. Lex, on the other hand, was completely relaxed, and was reveling in his schemes. He was slightly upset that neither Henry nor the appraiser paid attention to how the bag that was absolutely massive fit through a door it absolutely shouldn't have. It was just a simple trick of shifting it into and out of his spatial bangle faster than anyone else could notice while moving through the door. But the whole comedic spiel he was doing of a man carrying a bag much larger than himself seemed to be lost on everyone here. Perhaps since everyone was a body cultivator, feats of strength were a lot easier to accept here. He would need to keep that in mind. Disgruntled, the appraiser moved towards the bag and opened it, revealing the top of a neatly organized, clean stack of body parts harvested from local beasts. The appraiser gave a questioning look to Lex before he exited the booth and called for an assistant. One by one, the appraiser began to study the body parts and confirm their quality, while the assistant placed them aside neatly and marked which commission they were a part of. Lex and Henry observed in silence as the man continued to remove body parts one at a time, marking each of them as perfect quality, having suffered no harm during the killing or harvesting process. After a while, though, as the number of parts removed from the bag became so massive that there was little room left in the booth for them, Henry began to look at Lex oddly. Had he really done it? Logically speaking, based on the size of the bag, the body parts at the bottom should have been crushed or at least deformed a little, but no. Each and every piece removed was in perfect quality. In the end, the appraisal process alone took more than an hour, surpassing the time it took for Lex to actually bring the commissions back in. All the commissions you took are complete, Henry said, dumbfounded at the words he was saying. In fact, you brought some extra pieces. Your rewards total up to 3 gold coins and 31 silver coins, and your rank has been increased to 4. Would you like to collect your reward, or keep it at Simple Life as credit? Credit is fine for now. Can we head out? I want to accept some rank 2 commissions. Wait, what? Henry followed Lex as he exited the booth, after giving the appraiser a nod. He walked to the rank 2 hunting commissions and, once again, accepted them all. You can't keep accepting all of them, Henry said, lamenting Lex's speed. He hadn't even given him any time to consult with his manager. Discover new stories at novelhall.com. Alright, how about I only accept a few of them for now? But I complete all of them, and then you just keep registering them while the appraiser checks everything? Yeah, I think that could work, Henry said, suddenly feeling excited. It suddenly occurred to him that instead of worrying about getting caught for breaking the rule for allowing Lex to accept so many commissions, he should find a way to capitalize on it somehow. He didn't believe for an instant that Lex completed all the commissions in an hour, but regardless, the Simple Life building had profited from his actions, regardless of his agenda. That meant if he could improve his relationship with Lex, he could stand to get a raise from all this somehow. Herney, why don't you deal with this? In the meantime, I'll go deal with the rank 3 commissions. Yes. Absolutely. You can trust us to appraise all your stuff without issue. Every single item will definitely be accounted for. Lex chuckled, and then left the room. The appraisers were stunned as they began to unpack the bag, and the sudden disappearance of all the jobs for rank 2 that dealt with hunting began to attract notice. Both the crowds and the staff began to notice something strange going on as assistants were getting summoned away and there were fewer and fewer work staff on the ground. Around 40 minutes later, the second batch of Lex's haul got appraised, but they only had a short break for 20 minutes later. Lex walked back in with another massive bag. Hey, what are you doing? I don't think I've ever seen you here before, asked one of the regulars of the Simple Life building. People had begun to suspect that the disappearing commissions might have something to do with Lex, but how could that be possible? Yeah, I'm just here for the day, doing a few chores, replied Lex with a smile. Before the man could ask any more questions, Henry found Lex and brought him to the private room. The assistants and the appraisers who had been working non-stop became pale at the sight of Lex carrying yet another bag. Shall we do it like last time? Lex said as he left the bag. Mr. Lex, The thing is, my manager informed me that, if you've already done all the rank 3 commissions, and you go to do all the rank 4 ones, we might not have the liquidity to pay you the amount owed in a short time. Don't worry about that. I don't mind keeping it as credit for now. Besides, maybe I could buy something from you instead. That would prevent you from having to pay me all at once. So, does that mean you're still doing the commissions? Lex just smiled at him, then looked at the pale workers who were trembling and waiting for an answer with dread. Why don't you get all the lads here a little pick-me-up from me for all their hard work? Something to boost their energies. I'll be back in an hour. Chapter 1029. There's still more. Henry knocked on a door filled with a nervous, yet excited energy. One way or another, this day would go down in simple life history, and Henry was already a part of it. "Come in," said an unsteady voice from inside. Henry entered to the sight of a worried-looking man studying a piece of paper held by the manager. They seemed to be reviewing some numbers, and were whispering amongst themselves. "Manager, I just came in to report that Mr. Lex has left the bag for the rank 3 commissions and has gone out to complete the rank 4 commissions." The manager and the other man both paled at the news, almost losing strength in their limbs. "Didn't you tell him that we might not be able to pay him if he keeps on like this? Just the rank 3 commissions should make his income around 18,000 gold pieces. Rank 1 and 2 were still fine, but rank 3 is expensive. If he now goes and completes all rank 4 commissions we don't have that kind of liquidity." I did. He didn't seem bothered by it. He said, at most, he'd just keep it in credit or maybe he'd just buy something from us. He also asked me to reward the appraiser with something to help keep them energized. I brought a list here for you to review before I disperse the rewards. "Buy something, do you think he's after something in particular?" the manager asked the other man in a low voice. "Go get a list of our entire inventory. And I mean the entire inventory. There has to be more to the story than we know." The other man quickly ran out of the room, as if his life depended on this task, while Henry came in and showed the manager the paper. Lex, who was watching everything from far away, could not help but laugh. Yes, there really was more to the story than they knew about, but none of them would ever be able to guess his motives. The best. "Mr. Lex, how about you look through our inventory list and decide for yourself?" I really can't." All right, bring me the list. And here, someone take this." Lex unceremoniously dropped the bag of body parts on the floor, as if it didn't contain exceedingly valuable parts. Henry ran off, and returned only a few moments later holding a piece of paper. Behind him, his manager was also following, though his pace was that of a normal stride as he tried to maintain a sense of dignity. Lex glanced at the list, and pointed directly to something called divine serum, which cost about 100 gold per bottle. "This one, it should have a revitalizing effect, right? Just give this to all of them." "That is... are you sure? Isn't that a little overdoing it? That's for people with injuries that could lead to death. How about I suggest something?" "No, the serum will be fine. They have a lot of work to do before they even get to the bag I just brought. If they're not full of energy, how are they going to manage when I go and get the final bag?" "Final bag? You mean, you're still going back?" "Of course I am," Lex said with a nod. "There's still some rank 5 requests left. I'll see you in an hour." Lex nodded and left the room, and the manager, who had arrived close enough just to hear the last part, fainted. Chapter 1030. Stunned. The rank 5 commissions didn't really require hunting the golden core beasts. There were 2 of them within the vicinity of the city, and their presence kept the entire ecosystem balanced. They were also smart enough to not challenge the city, though they would not hesitate to act out if anyone entered their territory. The tasks involved stuff like collecting molted scales or getting blood samples. Regardless, it was easy enough for Lex to do. Even though he noticed that the golden core beasts had particularly strong bodies, and boasted strength above that of the norm outside of this realm, none were as abnormal as Lex. Which meant that, once again, Lex was done within a few minutes. Once done, Lex simply walked around the city while he planned his next move. By now, the crowd around Simple Life had been dispersed, and only a few notable people remained. It seemed like a representative from both Tauren and Wood families had arrived, as well as a few other powerful people. He had no intentions of getting involved with them as he found politics to be tedious, so whatever he did next would have to be somewhere else. One drawback, he learned, of being very strong was that it was more difficult than anticipated to keep himself ignorant. He had tried to limit his use of spirit sense so that he would not yet come across answers to why the crown was important or what purpose it served. But even so, just his normal hearing was enough to gather enough information to come up with an answer. It seemed like besides humans taking to using the projections as a sort of caste and nobility system, the sealed domain also favored those with a higher projection. People could use their aura to open up certain portions of the domain that were otherwise sealed and contained phenomenal treasures and opportunities. There were also certain areas from where one could gain control over certain sections of the sealed domain itself. It seemed like a group of families had taken control over various such regions, and thereby gained control over the entire domain. It also offered a few other minor perks such as intimidating others with a lower projection level, though that would only happen if Lex let the projection leak out its aura. Speaking of which, letting some of the aura of his gold crowns leak out before leaving might be a nice touch. They'll verify and tabulate your total income and rewards from all the commissions you've completed, said the man as he motioned Lex to take a seat. It might take a couple of days to gather all 112,500 gold coins that you are owed, however. I hope you understand. We were not expecting anyone to go through all the tasks so quickly. By the way, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Cleith, and I am in charge of all Simple Life operations in the region. Well, Cleith, don't worry about the gold. Like I told Henry, I'll just take a couple of things from your inventory, and the rest you can hold on to as credit. Mr. Lex, you have been incredibly generous, Cleith said with a bow. To be honest, it would probably be good for us to hold on to your income as credit. However, Simple Life aspires for simplicity in all its endeavors. Holding on to such a large amount that I owe someone else will make me feel uneasy. I would rather continue to operate normally, even if it somewhat affects our daily operations for a short while. Lex raised an eyebrow. He was not expecting that. He could also tell that Cleith had no ulterior motives when saying this, and he was not trying to appear humble or honest when saying such things, but was actually being straightforward. In that case, Lex spread out his spirit sense and covered the entire city. He even allowed some of the aura from his projection to leak out and be sensed by Cleith. It took him only a few seconds to decide what to do, so he withdrew his aura. Bring me a pen and paper so that I can give you a list of instructions, Lex said, but Cleith did not respond. Instead he just stood there, stunned. What had he just sensed?